Good morning and welcome to our special coverage on the 29th APEC happening in Bangkok, Thailand. Well, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum for all APEC opens its annual economic leaders meeting today in Bangkok. It's the leaders' first face-to-face meeting in 3 years since the pandemic. And the group, founded in 1989, is made up of 21 economies of the Pacific Rim. And this year's host country, Thailand, hopes to achieve an agenda for regional integration that is inclusive and sustainable in its growth strategy and balances health, economy, and the environment. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has delivered a written on Thursday said cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region is steadily advancing and that win-win cooperation remains the underlying trend in the region. And she made the remarks in a written speech to business leaders attending the APEC CEO summit in Bangkok.
In his written statement, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the Asia-Pacific is no one's backyard and should not become an arena for big power contest. He also stressed that no attempt to wage a new Cold War will ever be allowed by the people or by our times. Xi said that peaceful development is a strategic choice that is fundamental to the interests of the Chinese people. The president indicated that facing new developments, APEC members need to draw on past experiences and lessons, respond to the challenges of the times, and steadfastly advance Asia-Pacific regional economic integration. Meanwhile, Xi called for joint efforts in breaking new ground in development and building an Asia-Pacific community with a shared future. Xi also elaborated on the goals of development. He said we should follow a path of peaceful development, openness and inclusiveness and solidarity. President Xi said the country will follow a new path of maintaining harmony between humanity and nature during the pursuit of Chinese modernization.
And Chinese President Xi Jinping also began a series of bilateral talks in Bangkok with his counterparts ahead of the APEC meeting. He met with the Philippine President Ferdinand Ramirez Marcos on Wednesday. And she said China and the Philippines were both developing countries in Asia and that to maintain peace and stability in the region, they should resist unilateralism and hegemony. And the president added that China would expand imports of high-quality agricultural products from the Philippines. President Marcos said his country should like to deepen cooperation with China in infrastructure, energy and agriculture and establish stronger bilateral relations. He reiterated the Philippines' commitment to the One China policy. And meanwhile, President Xi Jinping and Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong also met ahead of the APEC economic leaders meeting. President Xi hailed relations between China and Singapore as forward-looking and strategic. He said China is committed to making high-quality cooperation the hallmark of bilateral ties. He added that China will work with Singapore to oppose group politics and reject attempts at decoupling and severing supply chains. And Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said Singapore looks forward to deepening relations with China. Lee noted that the strong and friendly China is good for the region and the world as well, especially for smaller nations. And the Prime Minister said Singapore will explore ways to participate in China's Global Development Initiative, or GDI. And in his talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, President Xi said China is ready to keep bilateral ties with Japan on the right course and called for two neighbors to be partners, not threats. At the bilateral meeting, which lasted nearly 4 hours, Xi said China and Japan need to engage each other in mutual trust and view each other's development objectively and rationally. And she noted China and Japan marked the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year and that their economies are highly interdependent. Thus, the need to step up dialogue and cooperation. He also called on the two countries to properly manage their differences, uphold strategic autonomy, and work together to ensure Asia's sound development. Prime Minister Kishida said that Japan's stance on the Taiwan issue still remains unchanged. He added that Japan will maintain high-level dialogue with China to help enhance mutual trust and bring constructive bilateral ties to a level fit for the new era. And for today's discussion in the studio, we are now joined by Professor Wang Xinsong from the School of Social Development and Public Policy at Beijing Normal University, and also Professor Liu Baocheng, the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics, University of International Business and Economics, who is joining us via video link. Welcome, gentlemen, to our special coverage. But first of all, let's look at Chinese President Xi Jinping's written speech at APEC CEO Summit. He said, 21st century is the Asia-Pacific century. How should we understand this sentence? Does it mean that Asia-Pacific region should be the leader of enhancing global cooperation? Mr. Liu.
Yes, the Eastern Pacific region over the past 2 decades, I should say, has a stellar performance to contribute to global growth, and also the fact that this region has been maintaining peace and stability, and that proves to be quite a showcase to many parts of the world that this is really the precondition for development and for a mutual cooperation between different states. So the 21st century could also witness that the contribution by the dynamic and robust growth of this region will still be very important. And then, the cooperation between different countries are there to further elevate the friendly ties and eventually benefit to the people of all countries. And then to maintain peace and stability, President Xi emphasized the fact that each country's sovereign autonomy should be respected, and therefore nobody is really running errand to any big power, and in which China is equal and conducive players in that regard. So he's pointing to the fact that when many of the superpowers are really fighting for regional blocs, for selected allies, and that's something that's going to hurt the growth and the development of this region. So right now, we should really go for a concerted efforts to address the looming issues like pandemic, like climate change, and more practically, let's go for infrastructure development, let's go for agricultural and industrial development, and disregard of those differences that are in the way for our strengthened collaboration. So the fact that we have the regional economic partnership, we have the bilateral investment treaties, we have the bilateral free trade agreements, and these are really the basic rules that each member will have to follow to further strengthen our collaboration in trade and investment, and also people-to-people exchange.
Right, and Mr. Wang, what's your take on this? How do you see the current cooperation, collaboration in the region, and should it be the leader of recovering the future world economy?
Well, first of all, I think no one would doubt the fact that the global economic gravity has already shifted to this part of the world, to the Asia Pacific, and we're talking about over 60% of the world's GDP being represented in this entire region. And so if you think about the historical development from the 19th century to today, and I would say the 19th century featured a European leadership of the global order to extent, and the 20th century seems to be featuring the United States leading the world in many respects. But toward the end of the 20th century, this part of the world, we are seeing emerging markets and emerging regional and increasingly global leaders who are taking more and more responsibilities in providing public goods that benefit the entire world. And just take the economic, the trade as an example. Within the bloc, within this region, trade has been increasingly a feature for all the nations. For example, China is one of the leaders, working very closely on trade with all countries in this region. China is the largest trading partner of over 130 countries in the entire world, and many of them are in this region. At the same time, across blocks, Asia Pacific is very closely connected with all other parts of the world. Let alone the fact that within this Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation platform, it features not only countries in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, but also countries coming from the other parts of the rims of Asia Pacific, including the United States, Mexico, and so on and so forth. So the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation platform really features what is the main characteristics of today's global economy, that is diversity, inclusiveness, and also increasing cooperation. So if you ask me whether the 21st century, this part of the region is going to be the world leader, well, at least I would say by looking at the trade, economy, and increasingly political cooperation, this region is becoming ever more significant.
Right, it is a pretty much strategic region to the whole world's development indeed. And Australian financial analyst Dario Guppy notes that a fundamental difference between the West and China is China's people-centered philosophy of development, while the West regards poverty alleviation or reduction as a byproduct of development. For China, poverty alleviation is, of course, a central mission. So would you please help us understand, Mr. Liu, China's people-centered philosophy of development, because it is underlined in President Xi Jinping's written speech to APEC as well, calling for all countries in the region to develop a people-centered development?
Well, I think both of these concepts really make sense. And for the first concept, by growing the pie, hopefully that each one can really be entitled for economic flourishing through productivity and through more job opportunities. So that could be an ultimate solution. And of course, for all economies, there are two very important issues. One is how we can really boost growth. The other is how we can really divide or reallocate the benefits out of economic growth. But we do notice that if we just allow the capitalism or market runs wild, it might be there to boost growth, but the fair distribution would be very much put into the question. And so that's why China maintains it's a mixed economy where the government is there to cater more to the public goods, and the market continue to function by itself on the private motivation. And then it is also the Chinese culture. It's I think it's really the Confucius dynamism that is at work, and we regard all the country as an extended family, where the government has been patriarchal in bringing up every case around the family. So therefore, the stronger ones, the richer ones, be it the area, be it people, they should really play a more contributory role to lift those people who are still struggling for jobs, struggling for Medicare, and for connectivity with more of the developed region. So that's really the Chinese approach. And China is really trying to strike a balance by boosting growth on one hand, and also by fair allocation of resources and economic flourishing to those who are less fortunate and who are less privileged. So this is the way that why China has been successful in lifting nearly 800 million people out of extreme poverty. And right now, we also are talking about shared prosperity. But this message, I think, needs to be further clarified and communicated effectively to the world that China is not really going for a egalitarian society, but rather, to have the sense of entitlement to everybody to the economic results as proposed by Mr. Xi. So this is the unique way of combination of our unique cultural, institutional, and situational structure that we adopt, but we do not really object to other modes of development and other modes of distribution of resources.
Right, and no matter what other economic policies may be, the basic principle is that people should be the first to be benefited. And in terms of regional cooperation or development or common development, connectivity is very much important. So removing the trade barriers and standardizing trade regulations are more important than cooperation on infrastructure. So how can APEC contribute to ensuring a smooth and also open regional trade framework, Mr. Wang?
Well, again, let's take the historical perspective first. And if you look at the historical development from the 19th century again to today, you will notice that there is an emerging trend. That is, whenever there was protectionism worldwide or even regionally, and people would expect more conflicts because establishing trade barriers would obviously limit the free flow of goods, information, people, and other commodities, which would prevent countries from achieving, preferential scenario of economic development. So that's why conflicts emerged almost every time after there was a regional or a worldwide economic and trade protectionism. Whereas free trade is benefiting so many countries, as seen from the development of the economy in the world in the past 70 years. China is obviously a very large beneficiary of this free trade world order. That's why China has been upholding this idea that we need to continue free trade because it benefits not only us, it benefits everyone in the world, including many of the countries in the regional bloc. Another important thing about economic development is the size of market. And if you look at the Chinese economic success, if I may call it a success, and one of the biggest assets of Chinese economic success is its market, and of course also a very well-regulated and developed market. Because with a good size of market, then we can then benefit from everything of the factors in the market, including labor, including land, including many of the taxes reduction and other benefits from the government subsidies and so on and so forth. And similarly, if you look at the European Union, they came up with this wonderful idea of uniting all the countries and giving up some of the sovereignty rights in terms of building a connected market and even a unitary a currency. So European Union also benefits a lot from a very united market. Right. And now it's the turn for this region, for Asia Pacific. China has been leading in many ways in developing many sectors and upgrading its own industrialization and so forth, which has already benefited many of the countries in East Asia and also Southeast Asia. So it's time for countries to really think about how we can better connect with each other, not only physically, but also, softly. Physically, in terms of infrastructure, I think China's Belt and Road Initiative is doing a great job in at least initiating the idea of connecting the East Asian, Southeast Asian countries so that we can all benefit from lower costs of moving goods and people around the countries. And we can already see the benefits. For example, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and Thailand all benefit from the emerging connectivity through the infrastructure, many of which financed by the Chinese government. So all in all, I think creating a bigger market and lowering the barriers in terms of connectivity, in terms of other regulatory barriers, would benefit all. And this is what the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Platform is really about. It is very important.
That's why President Xi said in his written speech that confrontations and bias can only lead to disasters, I think not only in Asia-Pacific region, in the whole world indeed. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be getting back to you in a short moment. And for more, our correspondent Martin Low is joining us from Bangkok to tell us more about the APEC that is ongoing. So Martin, good morning from Beijing. Tell us the highlights of the day.
Well, it's a big moment here. For those of us who live in Thailand, we've been looking forward to this meeting all year, and the APEC event is about to start in about 30 minutes from now. Now, you can't see it, but behind me is a giant video screen, and that's beaming live pictures of the various leaders from the 21 economic communities arriving here at the APEC venue. They're being met by the Thai Prime Minister on a red carpet and taken inside. And the meeting itself is due to start very shortly. Now, it's a packed economic agenda. They'll be discussing things like soaring inflation, which is causing problems around the world, the increasingly catastrophic effects of climate change in more and more places, rising food and energy costs, which are hitting people very much in their pockets right around the globe. Obviously, a lot of that is a spin-off from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Also, post-pandemic, there are still interruptions and threats to the global supply chain. That's causing concern in industry because vital parts for manufacturing are not getting through, but it also has an effect on everybody else because essential supplies like medicines and even COVID-19 vaccines are also being held up. Now, those are the big ticket events that are on the agenda, but on top of that, as well as the main meeting, there are a whole series of private bilateral meetings. These are one-to-one meetings between two leaders in a side room where they can sit down in a much less formal setting and they can talk about things face to face. We expect, obviously, foremost in people's minds will be that continuing conflict in the Ukraine. That will be discussed, we know, at great length because of the tragic loss of life, but also because of the economic spin-off and the effects it's having on food and energy right across the globe. Also, very close to home here in Thailand, right next door, Myanmar. That country is almost at the state of civil war as resistance continues to a military takeover at the beginning of last year, which has already led to the deaths of people in their thousands. And that's an awful situation that people will hope that world leaders can address. Thailand, as the host, is very much this year pushing a sustainable trade for the future. It's got its own policy called the Biocircular Green Economy. That very much suggests that all trade needs to be sustainable, and the way to do that is to encourage countries to concentrate very much on exploiting their own natural resources rather than feeling the need to bring raw materials in from outside. That's a big issue here in Thailand. That's something that the Thai people will be asking their APEC partners to hopefully take up as well.
Thank you very much. Martin Low reporting from Bangkok. Now, let's continue our discussion with our two guests, Mr. Wang Xinsong and Mr. Liu Baocheng. Well, Mr. Liu, you just heard the reporter said basically connectivity integration are the two key words of APEC, of regional integration indeed. BRI is doing just that, doesn't it? It builds bridge among all the countries it can reach. It also notes the it also acknowledges the diversity of political structure. That is a difficult job to do, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Talking about connectivity, I think, people need to revisit the basic concept of human nature and the unique part of people versus other animals that we are communal. And in the meantime, we learn to trade and exchange stuff we make. And I still remember Adam Smith mentioned we never saw two dogs are trading bones with each other. So that's the unique part of human nature. So distorting those human nature can really inviting punishment on their own. And this is the way for regional and global integration. And BRI is no exception. So we aim at, by specializing skills and by specializing the natural endowments, and people through exchange can mutually develop themselves. So this is really the basic notion of the theory of global trade and global exchange. Now, BRI has been there for almost 10 years, and we have really seen remarkable progress. And it's not only from the Chinese perspective, from the sites I visited, a number of projects, be it railways, ports, highways, and also the telecommunication, etc. And so it is really the benefit that is delivered through common efforts. It is really the Chinese initiative, but it's being shared and being welcomed by all participating members. And so we always say that facts speaks far louder, because right now BRI continue to face some of the criticism and the skepticism around the world. Is China dominating the other countries? Is China implementing a colonization? Is China trying to forge the debt traps with those countries? But see the facts that China treats every member equally. And that is also why we do not really have very hard, fast rules, and China is not really imposing a uniform rule across the Belt and Road countries. It's all, starting from project basis. Yes, because China is stronger comparatively to many other countries, therefore China is contributing a lot more. But China does respect the willpower of every country over specific projects and over the blueprints that we all enter into, and also the fact that China look at the development aid instead of simply giving a gift, but rather how we can really empower those people with the right type of human capacity, with the right type of facilities to stand on their own foot. Hopefully they continue to work with China on an upgraded basis through more of the self-reliance. So I think this is the model that China is contributing, and I think one unique part of China working with the Belt and Road countries, we make sure that we attach no political taglines over any type of cooperation. So that's the type of respect, in contrast with some other superpowers who are trying to implement their own willpower through the imposition on other nations.
Right. China has actually stressed for multiple times that BRI has been following a path of peaceful development, and that is something that President Xi Jinping called on all the countries in the region to do in his written speech to APEC as well. So, Mr. Wang, given the geopolitical tensions in the world, what principles and efforts are really needed to secure this path of peaceful development?
Well, I think in terms of these two terms, peace and development, they're very highly interconnected. Peace is not possible without development, and peace also contributes to more development. So the development needs a very stable global order, and that's why I think Mr. Xi emphasizes this point that in order for a regional economy to really flourish, we need to get rid of this mentality that one day there will be a war or some kind of conflict in this region, which really prevents many investors to be more comfortably investing in our region. And that brings up to another aspect of really thinking about the global order, that is the mindset of major countries. And first of all, I think competition is a given in our world. Human beings grow up and grow stronger out of competitions. But the question is how we view competition. If we view competition as sort of like a life and death problem, like us versus them, like you win, I lose, and this zero-sum mentality, exactly, then nobody is gonna win out of this game. On the contrary, if we view competition as sort of a positive sum incentive based on which every country is incentivized to do better, I think China's economic growth in the past several decades is partly explained that China is always facing upfront to the competitions, external competitions from the regional players, but also internally our enterprises, private enterprises and public ones are increasingly facing domestic competition. This competition really drove everybody to work harder, do better, be more efficient, be more profitable. So if you look at the local governments in China, one of the experiences many people ask about China's economic miracle, so-called miracle, and in my opinion, one of the biggest explanations of China's economic growth is the competition of local governments. They were all competing with each other to deliver better economic performance, to achieve, in a better way of the indicators and goals allocated by the central government in terms of economic growth and also ecological conservation, et cetera, et cetera. So all in all, I think competition is a good thing. And human beings cannot get rid of competition, and let's face it, in a more positive way.
Right.
I think China is encouraging that these other regional and global powers all join China's cause of respecting each other, respecting diversity. And let me just add a few words about the previous issue on diversity versus, BRI projects. I think being our BRI projects, the major idea of that is to connecting or build more connectivity among all countries in the world. But nonetheless, it is making sure that diversity is well preserved. In other words, connectivity is not conflictual with diversity. So this is also a Chinese development philosophy. We want development, but that doesn't mean we will kill diversity.
Indeed, about competition, we have competitors in competitions, but we have enemies in conflicts. Indeed, that's very different, and conflicts may hinder development, as what Mr. Wang said, or even erase the achievements of a development. That's something that we don't really want to see. All right, gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you in a moment. In 2020, the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 outlined the group's way forward in the next 20 years. APEC members have committed to closer cooperation under a rules-based multilateral trading system and pledged to advance economic integration to drive a global recovery.
The long-term blueprint aims for an open, dynamic, resilient, and peaceful Asia-Pacific community by 2040 for the prosperity of all our people and future generations. To achieve the vision, APEC set out 3 economic drivers: trade and investment, innovation and digitalization, as well as strong, balanced, secure, sustainable, and inclusive growth. The APEC member economies pledged to continue working together to deliver a free, open, fair, non-discriminatory, transparent, and predictable trade and investment environment. They reaffirmed support for the agreed-upon rules of the World Trade Organization in delivering a well-functioning multilateral trading system and promoting the stability and predictability of international trade flows. On innovation and digitalization, members pledged to foster an enabling market-driven environment which will strengthen digital infrastructure, accelerate digital transformation, narrow the digital divide, and strengthen consumer and business trust in digital transactions. To ensure the Asia-Pacific region is resilient to shocks, crises, pandemics, and other emergencies, APEC members said they will foster quality growth that brings palpable benefits and greater health and well-being to all. They will also intensify inclusive human resource development and promote economic policies which support global efforts to comprehensively address all environmental challenges. The bloc said it will advance the vision with the spirit of equal partnership, shared responsibility, mutual respect, common interest, and common benefit.
And now back to our studio, Mr. Liu Baozheng online and Mr. Wang Xinsong in the studio. First of all, a question to both of you, gentlemen. What do you want to see? What do you expect from the APEC leaders meeting? Mr. Liu first.
Well, of course, now there is a wide settled a consensus over the number of imperative issues that are being shared by all the members over there in terms of the climate change, in terms of the digital development, in terms of the infrastructure and inclusiveness, etc., etc. But I do expect that a certain type of rules can be generated, if not on the table, but as the follow-up meetings, etc. Because we do see that the APEC over the past more than 30 years, they have generated the regional comprehensive economic partnership. They also is the important forum to generate the TPP, and later on it converged into the CPTPP, etc. Because this is something to start with, to shake the consensus at the meeting, but without the binding rules that are there to follow, and then people will simply have a handshake and say goodbye. So this is something that I do need to see that there's kind of a framework in addition to a joint declaration over a number of issues, and then after the top leaders meeting, and the ministers and bureau directors should really quickly follow up to consolidate the number of agreements that have been reached. So anyhow, this is really the consolidation and fruition of those important issues to forge the type of implementable and enforceable agreements that will count.
So regional consolidation, Mr. Wang, do you agree?
Yes, I do think regional consolidation will be one of the major themes of this upcoming leaders meeting. At the same time, I think another important target or side product of this platform is going to be trust building, which is especially needed at this moment when major powers, global-wise and also regional-wise, are having an issue with trust. So not only because of the pandemic, which prevented the APEC summit to be held physically for 3 years, but also because of the conflicts in Ukraine and Russia, and also the geopolitical competition and issues among other major powers in the world. Like I said earlier, I think peace is a very important factor in development. So building trust so that all major powers can be prevented from escalating their conflicts will be very significant to contributing to regional and global economy and trade. And that's why I think APEC summit is very, very important, because it creates a platform for all leaders to meet physically, and handshaking is very important, and also sometimes casual conversations are also very
Strong
important.
signal of recovery.
Very strong signal, and also very strong, important platform, very important. Another thing about APEC summit is going to build consensus. If you look at the logos of the Thailand APEC summit, connect, open, and balance.
Right.
That really reminds me of the what's been recently concluded in the 20th Party Congress. And during the Congress, the work report lays out China's modernization, which really talks about openness, inclusiveness, and balances within the country and also cross countries and between human development and the natural development. So these logos really echo between Thailand and China, and echo among the entire region. That's what I meant by consensus building. Such a summit is really going to contribute for all countries to enhancing the consensus on what are going to be the major targets and missions for all countries, and it seems that we already share many of that.
China's goals are set at the 20th National Congress of CPC really fits into not only the APEC but also G20's aims of connectivity, open and common development, etc., as we just said. And I think people should be happy to see that the second largest economy is making all those very positive promises. And this is the third time in 3 years that the leaders are meeting face to face, as you said, Mr. Wang, sending a very strong signal of recovery. The pandemic's had great impact on world economy already, and there are also other crises emerging in many parts of the globe, such as regional conflict. What does it mean to convene such a meeting of consolidation, regional consolidation at this time? So, as what Xi Jinping put it, the 21st century is all about Asia-Pacific region. Mr. Liu.
Yes. Well, it is really a crucial time. The world economic and political order is on a rapid evolution, and right now, from a polarized world into a multipolar world, and Asia Pacific definitely are there, play the instrumental role in supporting the geopolitical integrity and also economic recovery. And so therefore, much of the hope is placed on this region, be it the superpowers, be it the lesser developed countries, and the Asian Pacific region is considered to be the locomotive to shore up the global growth and to bring the best practices that can be benchmarked on by those countries. So the infrastructure development is still the key for for this region, and that's where the people and goods can really physically meet with each other. And then the telecommunication is there to share the information, particularly aiming at the digital economy. And then the rule setting is still something that needs to be further consolidated, in that we, for example, we used to have the bilateral free trade agreement between countries, and then we have the regional agreements like the RCEP, and then further we may have the further upgrading of those both bilateral and multilateral and regional ties in reducing continuous basis the trade barriers like tariff and difficult investment procedures, etc. And we also see the hope that countries can really be working together on a deeper level with the environmental protection through the common efforts, and to raise also the labor standard, and also to bring a more of level playing fields for all companies, be it state-owned or private ones, etc. So this is really the world of shared prosperity, starting from the Asian Pacific region by respecting diversity, but aiming at growth and shared.
Right, Mr. Liu, all those principles, all those efforts are very exciting and very positive indeed. But what's your assessment of its implementation, current implementation of all those ideas in the region?
Well, the current implementation very practically build roads and build bridges and build trains, and try to save time from the negotiation table, but go to the sites and do the job. So this is really something that is very Asian and also very Asian Pacific. And then the people-to-people exchange. So we do see that through the number of international students I teach, and also through the number of visits that Chinese companies and individuals in those regions, we do see that there is a quite elevation of people-to-people meeting with each other. And now the leaders meeting in first in Bali over the G20, now in Bangkok for the APEC, and face-to-face, because we are human. Is face-to-face interaction is is not really there to be substituted by video links, by telephone calls, etc. So, and then, to have a sort of the shared platform that is there, so that each one can really be able to foresee their contribution, in return what would be their benefit out of it. And I think the other issue is that a private sector needs to be further molded. Now we do see that those political leaders are commanding all the spotlights, and now we do see that the Asian Pacific region requires those business leaders to take a more responsible role, not only there to bring the productivity for their own company, but also contribute to the benefit of all the people by working with the government, by working with the civil society, and so that we are really living up more to the sustainable agenda set forth by the United Nations, and let the Asian Pacific region to come up with some of the best practices that can be shared and proliferated around the world.
Right, a lot of rooms and potential for further connectivity and development indeed. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll be getting back to you in a moment. Now, Renmin University of China and the Hong Kong Polytechnic have hosted the APEC Energy Forum 2022 in Beijing. Participants discussed energy transformation, innovation, climate finance, and also biodiversity. CGTN's Biran tells us more.
APEC economies are under increasing pressure to act on energy transformation. They are being urged to practice meaningful cooperation in low-carbon development and promote multilateralism within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Given the importance of this region in the global economy, its success in resolving these challenges will have major bearing on global progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement.
The 7th UN Sustainable Development Goal stresses the importance of access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. The shift towards new energy in China has been accelerated in recent years. Its proponents say new energy projects spur industrial innovation and improve livelihoods.
China pursues a green and low-carbon development concept, and President Xi Jinping has set new strategies for energy development. Low-carbon energy transition is our development direction.
Intergovernmental platforms, technological assistance, and research functions are key to achieve those goals.
APEC has set itself commendable targets for energy efficiency improvements and the greater use of renewable energy. APEC has a shared goal to improve energy intensity by at least 45% by 2035 relative to 2005 levels. For renewable energy, it has targeted a doubling in the share of modern renewables in the energy mix by 2030 relative to 2010.
While achievements are welcome, the UN's latest climate report says far more drastic actions needed if we hope to avert climate disaster. Biran, CGTN, Beijing.
Back to our discussions. Mr. Wang, APEC is set to enable more people to benefit from Asia-Pacific regional integration and economic development. What exactly are the mechanisms to enable people to reach the goal?
Well, APEC itself as a platform has created opportunities for major leaders, not only the heads of governments, but also ministers who had already had their meetings before the upcoming leaders meeting, but also CEOs and major entrepreneurs and think tankers all gathered along the way with the leaders meeting. So this is a multilateral platform that creates an opportunity for conversation, dialogues, and sharing views and opinions. But more specifically, I think the APEC meeting is also creating opportunities for countries to get into more detailed discussion on how they can upgrade and improve their already existing and happening bilateral trade relations. For example, when Thai is now hosting the APEC meeting, it creates an opportunity for the Thai government to get into conversations with all these participants, including especially China, understand that China and Thailand have already developed very close trade relations. For example, China is a major target country for Thailand's agricultural products, including fruits. And so more specific discussion on how both countries can lower barriers, but not only physical, but also institutional barriers, so that Thai's agricultural products can be sold to China in an easier way. And so we're talking about the passing time through the customs, and we're talking about the tariffs to be imposed on both sides. By removing these barriers, Thai fruits don't have to wait for long hours, and they can get into the Chinese market immediately in a much shorter time. So all of that ensures that individual farmers, people on the ground in both countries, can benefit from free trade and from lower barrier bilateral trade and economic cooperation.
Right, and Mr. Liu, as we've been facing so many challenges, and those challenges such as regional conflicts, the pandemic, etc., actually have nurtured the trend of the protectionism and unilateralism in many parts of the world. How has the Asia-Pacific region been impacted by that, and how and what can APEC do to confront that trend?
Well, the consensus and consolidation to defend the basic notion of free trade that can benefit business and benefit people and benefit suppliers, etc., is there that requires further reiteration, and then to continue to build a rule-based free trade and investment structure is something that is highly realistic. We have the 15 countries, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and China is teaming up with a dozen countries and continually on the bilateral free trade agreement. And now the CPTPP is already working with 11 countries, and China and even UK are there seeking their membership. So further consolidation, elevation of a rule-based economic and trade structure is something that is there to really to bond the people together. Even though leaders may change, the norms of trade and investment will still be there. And the other is that through the years, the Asian Pacific region realized that they can really manage to stand their own feet to develop their economy, and through trade they get the type of enrichment, so that shopping over the fences for a temporary favor, or yielding to immediate pressure on political front to any superpower is not really there to benefit on their own. And then also that let's start with some very practical issues. I could also see that continually infrastructure building is something that is there badly needed. And look at Laos. They without the Chinese contribution, they don't even have the right type of railways to start with their economy. And then capacity building, both for the existing workforce, bureaucrats, and also the younger generation who are ready to have their own startup, are something that we can really deal with it on a more positive basis. And then how we can really together to defend the interest of this region, because we are talking about the climate change, and this region has been blamed on the other hand, in addition to its economic growth, to emit more to the carbon dioxide, but because this region is so dynamic in their industrialization, urbanization process, it is inevitable that being a manufacturing powerhouse to supply some of the countries who do not really make cars, who do not really make mobile phones, who do not really make shoes and tires, etc. So, and then how? That's why we should also insist on the common but a differentiated responsibility system towards the climate change, and then let's also go for a more green development by saving more of the energy and by going together. Hopefully they may really put up some collaborative mechanism or even funds together to develop the green technology that can benefit all the members.
And a very good idea in terms of regional cooperation is the RCEP, Mr. Wang, which came into force at the start of this year. It's essentially a free trade agreement. Tell us what you think about the effective implementation.
Well, first of all, there have already been a number of free trade bilateral agreements between countries in this region. But RCEP really has been a multilateral platform, multilateral agreement that benefits everyone. And the point of having a multilateral agreement, in addition to all these bilateral free trade agreements, is that a multilateral platform reduces transaction costs. What that means is that singular countries do not have to negotiate specifically on detailed terms with every country's in the world or in the region, but rather they can all join one multilateral agreement which sets out the guidelines and rules for everyone. And also, if anyone violates the multilateral rules to be agreed upon, then there can be a dispute mechanism, and then there can also be a punishment system for those violators. So multilateral agreements really help out all the countries by lowering costs and benefiting everyone. Now, on RCEP, I think this region has already established very close economic and trade relations, but the barriers are still there. And this is very much because the countries are at different development levels. They also feature different sectors and the specialties. At the same time, this region is still seeing dominant influences from players outside this region. So what that means is that a lot of things need to be figured out by the powers and countries in the region to smooth out the cooperation by establishing a more stable, peaceful development environment. At the same time, to get countries into consensus on the best development goals, and this is not only regarding trade over goods and services, but also over development on the greener side, and that's why one of the slogans here at the Thai summit, APEC summit, is about a biocircular green economy, and which also echoes with China's ecological development goals. So RCEP really establishes this agreement so that every country can benefit not only from free flow of goods and commodities and services, but also establish a consensus on our common development goals.
Right, and Mr. Liu, while you talked about very important information about differentiated responsibilities for developing and developed countries in terms of carbon emissions or even the whole climate change policies, how different the policy should be?
Well, we should know that over the past 200 years, the industrialized countries, through their industrialization process, they have damaged the planet to a far larger degree than those developing countries, including China. Now, China is bearing the blame as the biggest carbon emitter, but we have a good reason to do that. Instead of being content with the current status quo, China is also making great efforts for greener development. And for all developing countries, they didn't really have a fair share in the industrialization process, and they were sidestepped during the process. So therefore, there should be a fair term for them to go for the industrialization, urbanization, in which definitely the CO2 emission would be larger in proportion. So that's the basic common but differentiated responsibility system. And having said that,
what's your opinion of RCEP's spectacular regulations about the differentiated responsibilities in terms of carbon emissions and environmental protection?
Well,
do you think
actually,
it's flexible enough?
RCEP is really a simplistic approach, simply to reduce trade barriers, particularly aiming at a further reduction of tariff and dealing with the facilitation of trade and investment. So, period. And RCEP does not really have much to do with the environmental protection, and there's not really a specific clause to address such sort of issues. And so only some broad strokes. So that is why we do expect that the CPTPP, in which China is actively seeking its membership, has a lot to do with the environmental protection, consolidated efforts, and even dispute mechanism. So this is something that is more valuable, and hopefully, I think there is a large probability that RCEP is going to be there to be further upgraded to be closer to the.
China has actually been promoting the regulations, the relative regulations, to be put into RCEP, indeed. All right.
That's right. That's right. I think China's initiative is that we do see that quickly RCEP can be further upgraded, and also our bilateral trade agreements with individual members can also be further upgraded to include inclusivity and also green development. So this is really something that China can do, and China can play. And also China has been making great efforts on its own self. If you look at the last 10 years, our reliance on coal has been reduced from more than 68% now to 56%. So this is a stellar achievement by Chinese efforts. And the other is that all the citizens are now being aware that they will waste less food, and they will be there to not to litter around the world, around the grounds, etc. And actually, this is really something in contrast with some other countries that they continue to exhaust more of the energy, and they are really having a lot more skepticism over the Paris Treaty, etc. And now, again, Mr. Wang a number of times emphasized that peace is important. Now, we didn't really, anticipate, I should expect that there can be a sort of a merriment of how the war or the conflict in Ukraine can really damage the global environment to what type of degree. So now, to maintain peace and to live up to green development, and then we have hope for ourselves and also for our future generation.
Right, and Mr. Wang, the Asia-Pacific region is undergoing rapid changes as the other parts of the world represent both great opportunities and enormous challenges. How important do you think the region's political and economic conditions are to the world?
Well, obviously, this region is becoming a new center of gravity in geopolitics, and it has always been, but obviously in the past years, it's been given new focus, especially because the United States is putting more emphasis on its interest in this region, and this creates a sort of a sense of tension among all countries in this region, because it seems to me that the U.S. has come to this region with this mentality that it wants to maintain its long-held leadership across the world, no matter where it is we're talking about, and especially in this region. And this creates tension not just politically, but it it has a hits-on effect on the economy and the investment environment. We're talking about many countries in Southeast Asia being left as to at a loss as to where to go. They don't know where to go. They don't want to take sides, although the U.S. seems giving more pressure on countries to choose sides. But that's really not a politically friendly environment that any country wants to live in. And that's why I think the Chinese are always emphasizing that let's give diversity a chance. Why is it important? Because when we talk about connectivity, when we talk about free trade and lowering barriers across countries, one precondition is that we respect each other, we trust each other. Trust is the single most important thing as the basis for all the communications, interactions across countries and between persons, right? On a daily basis, we all know that trust is very important to establish friendship and be happy.
And be happy is the most difficult thing in the world.
It is very difficult, especially when some countries feel that this is Cold War. You are not democracy, we're democracy. So let's split. That's not helping anyone. So I think what this Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting is also important is that it builds trust, it builds consensus, but it also creates a platform where countries can meet each other and deal with each other's differences. The more such meetings are, the better, because otherwise, without communication, people will simply accumulate their distrust.
Right. Without communication, people will be isolated for sure. What we are happy to see is that APEC Economic Leaders Meeting is surely to affect how the Asia-Pacific region addresses its major governance challenges such as terrorism, refugees, economic development, health, the environment we talked about. So what principles do you think that should be in place for the APEC economies to decide on those matters? Mr. Liu.
Yes, I think one immediate issue is public health issue. So therefore, can there be some sort of agreement or to follow up, to have a shared mechanism to address the current pandemic and the future ones? I think the G20 has generated such a pandemic fund, and that is something that that is crucial and also concrete achievement. So whether the Asian Pacific Forum can really come up with something similar, so that's something people would like to expect. And the other is that given now the imbalanced development level, so how we can really bring up a sort of mechanism that the recovery can be achieved around these countries by further streamlining some of the obstacles and eliminating some of the artificial barriers for free trade. And so, to promote mobility and to promote simplicity in the customs procedure, in the quarantine procedure, while the safety can be also ensured. And then also that, how we can really build a sort of working agenda to address climate change issues, looking at the reality. And, we talk quite a lot about the energy transformation, but how? It's merely by making a number of electric vehicles that does not really solve the problem. We need to have a basic mechanism to share the discovery and the inventions and also the road rules even in regulating the for the green development. And the other is that because we also have a lot of shared territory, shared waters, shared the borders, etc. So how to promote the concerted efforts that a river being shared will be protected on all sides of of the banks and all sides of the waters. So, and also excessive fishing is something that WTO has really made some progress in preventing the irregulated and excessive fishing. And so that, let's make sure that whether WTO or whether this region can beef up a certain mechanism to ensure that the environmentally friendly type of fishing can be maintained in conformity with the WTO rules. So these are really the very practical issues that we can really expect to get further consolidated after this meeting.
Right, and what about you, Mr. Wang? No mechanism, no principles are perfect. So how big a room do you think there is for further improvement of the APEC mechanisms and principles to decide on, to address all the challenges regional?
Well, let me first say that we probably don't want to overstate the importance of any platform, multilateral platform. And what we're seeing in today's world is that and which also distinguishes today's order with that during the Cold War, is that we are seeing multi-layers of thick networks across the world. For example, in Asia Pacific, we have APEC, we just concluded the East Asia Summit, and we just concluded the G20. And there are a bunch of other multilateral platforms dealing with all these different issues. Even on trade, you have multilateral agreement like RCEP, CPTPP. And on ecological issues, and Professor Liu just mentioned the conservation of ecology and the river issues, and there are also a couple of mechanisms dealing with, river conservation and pollution issues that crosses borders between China, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, but also to some extent Thailand. And there are also multilateral platforms dealing with political issues, security issues, and Shangri-La dialogue as an example, and so on and so forth. So it is because there are multi-layers of platforms taking on different global issues that global leaders and national governments are able to have more opportunities to meet, but also deal with specific issues at this individual and respective platforms. So back to APEC, I think it has developed over 3 decades into a very mature platform with very mature principles and guidelines to be followed by all countries. And it's also it's an annual event, which is different from some of the other platforms. So that means these high-level leaders can get together on an annual basis, no matter what. And of course, the pandemic has prevented physical meeting, but even virtually, they were still meeting online and seeing each other. So this is very important.
So you mean they can adjust their will every year actually to adapt to the change of time and events.
Yeah, which can be very timely because we're talking about a period world history where things can change on any minute. So an annual meeting really creates an opportunities for people, like you said, people can adapt and can make changes.
And then the APEC decisions, since as we just discussed for multiple times, that the 21st century is all about Asia Pacific region. Let's leave the question there. Let's go to the site to see what's going on there. Meanwhile, having our discussion. The APEC, Chinese President Xi Jinping is going to arrive at the convention, at the site of the APEC meeting. He's going to attend, and we're going to give you a live signal of that in a moment. Let's continue with our discussion with the guests, Mr. Wang Xinsong and Mr. Liu Baocheng. So the 21st century is all about Asia Pacific region, as President Xi said. What's your opinion of the decision by the APEC, regional decisions, how will it impact the global governance? Mr. Wang.
Mr.
Wang.
I think now. Oh, okay.
Well, I was going to say that the global governance.
All right, let's leave it there and go to the site of the APEC meeting. Chinese President Xi Jinping is arriving at the Queen Sirikit National Convention Center. That's what we see now, the venue of the 29th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting. And he arrived in Bangkok on Thursday after attending the 17th G20 summit in Bali. And now the Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is welcoming him. And Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Bangkok for the 29th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, which opens today and ends Saturday. It's the first face-to-face meeting, as we mentioned, of APEC leaders in 3 years since the pandemic. All right, that was Chinese President Xi Jinping arriving at the Queen Sirikit National Convention Center, the venue of the 29th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, and he's going to attend that event. And Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to hold formal talks with Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, and his visit coincides with the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the two countries' comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership. So now, Mr. Liu, I just grabbed your chance of talking. So now tell us, what do you think of this kind of partnership between China and Thailand, and even China and other countries in the region?
Well, as time and again we emphasize that the trust is the basis for any type of communication, and also that going to cut the cost of interaction with each other. So over this entire region, particularly in the Asian part, much of the efforts has been made to really forge the basic trust levels through better interaction. And now the Asian Pacific region is really large enough, and so given the diversity and trust building is difficult, but that is why it is even more important to have the sort of mindset of inclusivity instead of ethnocentrism. So trying to impose a set of templates on the country's development, on country's political and economic model, this is really something that is ungrounded and that's going to be rejected. And so that's the inclusivity part. The other is, the balance part. So we do see that the development level is very different among these countries, and that is why we are more flexible. So people will say, okay, you do not have as a very consolidated rules to play and very stringent rules to play, like what is being done in EU, etc. And this, we have to be realistic and in accommodating the differences in development level, so that we are all able to go together. And the other is, how we can really bring people together. We do see that over the past years through the programs and projects I've been involved, the younger generation are very robust in this region, and they team up in building up startups, and some of them have already turned out to be unicorns. And then also I still emphasize on the private sector, because if we look at the G20 that took place in Hangzhou, the private sectors, brought up the basic rules and basic proposal for building the e-commerce platform, which is already seen. Some of them are already firmly grounded in more than 20 of these countries. And so private sector, civil society, and government, and three, if all of them can really come up with a sort of concerted efforts, we do see that there's going to be huge progress. And lastly, I should say the dispute settlement mechanism is really difficult to to achieve, because people talk about friendship, and then Asian Pacific regions in their culture, they are more care about preserving of one's faith. So, but it is still necessary that whether we have a sort of a mediation system or conciliatory system, simply there to discipline different members to prevent some of the malbehaviors in trade and investment, in environmental protection, is still quite important, and that is there to ensure much of the discipline to play by the rules.
Apart from the meeting between President and Prime Minister Chan-o-cha in today, actually, is set to open. China and Japan on Thursday actually have met and reached a 5-point consensus on stabilizing the developing bilateral relations. The two sides agreed they should be partners, not threats. So, Mr. Wang, how critical is this in the development relations?
It is extremely important that the two national leaders eventually met, after a while, and especially considering the fact that in the past few years, this region has been suffering from a lot of external pressure, and China and Japan have long had very close economic relations. We are interdependent very closely. Nonetheless, we cannot avoid the fact that we all carry very heavy historical burden. Again, trust is a big issue. Neither country seems to have placed a very high level of trust, and for various reasons, historical reasons, but also contemporary events, especially the disputes over over some territories in East China Sea, and so on and so forth. And recently, Japanese government seems to elevate its stance on its attitude toward Taiwan Strait issue, which really aroused the strong reactions from China. So all these are background information that we need to consider when we, really look at the bilateral leaders' talks that just happened. So this is very important because it helped the two countries to rebuild trust. Then we can talk about more details in terms of how bilateral trade can continue, how economic interdependence can be deepened. At the same time, obviously, we cannot avoid the elephant in the room, which is the United States, which has given a lot of pressure on Japan to side with the U.S. stance on many issue areas, especially recently on the chip issue. And Japan has joined the so-called Chip 4 Alliance, led by the U.S., and this can create a lot of pressure on China's semiconductor industry development. Although China is very determined to be more self-sufficient and sparing no efforts in investing on native development of semiconductors, still cooperation with Japan and other partners like Korea still is very important. And then I'm hopeful that after the bilateral leaders talk, then can be next level ministerial and even more entrepreneurial interactions on this and other issues. But also I'd like to add that people-to-people exchange is extremely important. And I understand that in Japan the attitude toward China is not extremely friendly. Probably the same on the Chinese side. So that makes it extremely important for people to really have a chance to meet each other. And before the pandemic, China is a very huge tourist market for Japan, meaning that a lot of Chinese visit Japan. Even some of the middle class members visit Japan on a regular basis. Vice versa, Japanese tourists also visit a lot of Chinese places. This needs to continue. And also what needs to be continued is the exchange among university students, sometimes even high school students, because they are the future for the next generations of bilateral relations. So we need to accumulate this trust from day one and from today.
People-to-people exchange can work magic in terms of enhancing trust between any two countries, indeed. And efforts have been made to further enhance bilateral relations. China and Japan have also agreed to hold new round of high-level economic dialogue, for example. and strengthen cooperation in various fields, including green development and healthcare. So, Mr. Liu, what are some specific ways in which the two could enhance cooperation?
Well, I think Japan needs to be constantly reminded of the hard lessons they have earned for excessive geopolitical ambition, and then based on that, collaboration is still important because China honestly has a lot more to learn from the way that Japan manages industry and going forward for constant improvement in quality control of the product process, etc. So, and on the economic front, finally, we have a common bonding agreement, which is ASEP, and we used to spend a long time, almost a decade, to talk about a trilateral trade between China, Japan, and South Korea, and we have concluded the free trade agreement with South Korea long ago, but Japan has been very reluctant to come up with terms. And now, Japan has also a tendency of going stray from that part simply to side with the United States in terms of the trade embargo, in joining the Quad, etc. So this is really a sign that a worse warning from the Chinese side, and also their ambiguous, stance towards Taiwan is also there that needs to be alerted. And in spite of that, Japan is still the third largest economy, and we have such a strong neighborhood, and we also have such a level of complementarity in our trade and investment and economic structure. So there's a lot more potential that can be further developed. And I totally agree with Professor Wang that there used to be 15 years ago, I should say, that we had a honeymoon almost, between these two countries. Young people come and go, and they rally together for something of the common interest, and tourism has been booming, etc. But as you mentioned, that how a sort of mechanism can be really be there to build to further revitalize such sort of a stronger interaction. I believe that only by interaction people can really remove some of the distrust and build friendship and build understanding of each other's concern, and then collaboration can start from there. So this is a more realistic way of moving forward over the bilateral relationship.
Indeed. Well, China's President Xi Jinping has already met with his counterparts from the Philippines, from Japan, and he's going to meet with the Thai Prime Minister as well, and the many other meetings, the leaders' meetings are waiting at this occasion indeed. So this APEC meeting is going to be a very benign platform for a very good regional cooperation. We'll continue to observe for you all the way through APEC meetings, so stay tuned with CGTN. And this APEC meeting is now underway in Bangkok. We'll bring you the latest as the meeting progresses. So I'm Li Dongning in Beijing, and thanks for watching our special coverage of the APEC meeting.